And here we are for a very short episode of Dualistic Unity Social. We are getting ready for our roundtable episode that we have twice a month for our Tier 2 and Tier 3 supporters on Patreon. If you would like to be in an episode of Dualistic Unity, this is the best way to do that, unless, of course, we reach out and ask you to be a guest individually. If you would like to just join the conversation, the roundtable episodes are the best way to do that. Just be a Tier 2 or Tier 3 supporter, patreon.com/dualistic unity, and you can join us for the conversation. You can talk about a project that you're working on, talk about something that you're passionate about, share your website, share your business if you'd really like to, or just participate in the conversation and share your insights and share your lessons and your journey, because we're all in this together. So do keep that in mind. At the top of the hour, we are going to be on that roundtable episode. The details are on Patreon right now if you'd like to join us, but we're just going to sit here and kind of shoot the shit. Specifically, I thought I would go back to a conversation that Andrew and I had earlier today about the movie and book 1984, because we recorded a movie review of that today, and it's quite the movie. It's quite the story. It really is. Kind of a terrifying possibility of the future, but one has to look at, again, how perfect a storm it would have to be for us to get to that point. I think very much like Soylent Green, it's trying to make the case that this could be on the extreme horizon. And so I thought it was a powerful story as a whole. And of course, John Hurt, just an incredible performer. But yeah, I thought we'd start there. It was a great movie.
Yeah, very symbolic of just society. And even though it's a extreme sort of version of what could be, there's still signs of it right now. Like, I know 1984 is a pretty popular book and there's a movie about it, but I had never seen it before. I had never read the book before. And it is alarming, especially, I don't even know. Is COVID a thing that you can even say on social media without this getting flagged? I feel like it's going to get taken down, which is
Very good
alarming
question.
in itself. But that was, we just had a podcast episode. We talked all about 1984. It was a movie review, Dualistic Community Podcast. If you're interested, if you enjoy any of our content on Instagram or any of the social medias, you're going to love the podcast. So definitely check that out. But we have episodes where we'll review movies and talk about movies. And so we were talking about 1984. I just watched it this morning, and the comparisons to COVID, even just in the sense of censorship. And I guess we see that with censorship just in general, and how there was this common narrative. There was a common narrative that, everyone has to get the vaccine. And I'm like, can I even say vaccine on here? But I'm going to say it anyway. COVID vaccine, like, there's this narrative that is the thing. That's the answer. It's the only thing you can talk about. Anything else, Joe Rogan starts talking about ivermectin. It's like, no. And they ban that despite very few, side effects being pointed out necessarily, or, whatever it may be. Even the fact, even if the crazy side effects is something, the fact that you can't even discuss it, that it gets taken off of certain platforms, just the word itself is incredibly alarming. Like, but because they were able to instill a fear of this thing, this awful thing that's killing so many people, millions and millions of people, despite there being evidence coming out now that, and back then, that oftentimes the deaths, someone died of a car accident and they had COVID, it's a COVID death. It's like, it doesn't match up. And now there's more and more evidence coming out that there were things, way crazier things even than that, just to get those death counts up for COVID, and reinforcing this fear, this narrative. Oh, bad thing, terrible thing. Do everything you can to overcome. This is the enemy. Basically, just like 1984, they were able to turn a specific thing into an enemy and then create a solution that they just happen to make a fuckload of money off of. Oh, would you look at that? Surprise, surprise. Like, how are you not willing to look at the fact that most of the people making the rules about it are invested in the companies that are pushing the vaccine? It's like, it's funny even saying it right now, how people I'm sure and I can't be sure, but probably have ideas and are uncomfortable even hearing about that. It's like, no, you can't talk about that. Oh, right wing, crazy conservative. Oh, blah 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 blah. And it's like, just look. It's. I'm not even saying anything with any degree of certainty whatsoever, but we can at least talk about it. We can at least have the conversation. And even now, now we're starting to see more and more repercussions of it. And we're seeing, as Ray mentioned in that episode, that people are going back on the things that they did. Oh no, we never forced you to do that. We never forced anyone to get any vaccine. It was completely by choice. So yeah, there's symptoms, but it just came out. We only had 6 months to put it together. It's like, oh, we didn't push anything. Technically, maybe, but people couldn't work. People couldn't, go anywhere without having it. In many, many cities, you couldn't do anything if you didn't get vaccinated. And so it's just alarming that there's even how unwilling we are to even look at that. I posted video or restoried videos from doctors who are well-renowned doctors when it comes to infectious diseases, who are saying things like, masks don't do as much as we think. There's things to be hesitant about in regards to the vaccine. There's other ways of overcoming or working through this. And they got banned by Instagram. They got taken down. They got said this may include misinformation. It's like, but if it was something along the lines of the common narrative that you got to do this, there was no misinformation there, despite it being equally as uncertain. And the inability to have a conversation, just a conversation, is alarming. And that's what we see in 1984. It's like there's this push to not even be able to have conversations. You're safer if you just agree and just do as you're told, and it cuts off all of our humanity, all of our uniqueness, everything about the inability to even talk about certain things. It's a massive component of our humanity, being the freedom to act and to think as we would like and converse about it. We were forced to think in a very specific way, maybe not immediately directly, but certainly, in a roundabout way.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting because just like in 1984, it's how things are changed over time, and we really do, or we, and I say that collectively, um, we don't tend to question things once they're everybody knows. Like everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows what vaccine means. Everybody knows what a vaccine is, and they'll compare it to polio and smallpox and stuff like that. But when you go and you look, and this is why they encourage you not to do that, the word vaccine itself has been changed like twice in the last 2 decades, um, and diminishing its efficacy each and every time. Like at one point, there were certain requirements that a vaccine must get rid of the illness, and then later on is like, well, it must stop transmission, and then later on it must basically just treat the illness. And so now a vaccine is more a treatment rather than a cure. But most people don't know that. Most people don't actually go and look at how the word vaccine has changed or has been used differently over time. And so when the government's like, we have a vaccine, everybody assumes like, oh shit, this is done. Like this thing's just going to be wiped out, just like we've wiped out all of these other historic pandemics, these historic illnesses, right? But that's not the case anymore. And this is why I thought it was really interesting. And we mentioned this very early in the podcast. Um, the biggest question mark for me was whether or not the vaccine stops transmission. And if it doesn't stop transmission, then essentially all you're doing is masking the vaccine. Or masking the illness. Like you're having a vaccine that makes it so it's less obvious that you have that illness. So you can get on planes and you can go to restaurants and you can go to the gym and you can do all that still with COVID, but not showing signs of COVID. And that just kind of baffled me, because basically what they were doing is just saying like, let's just let it run rampant. So long as we can't see it, everything's fine. But the people who are showing it, well, those are the bad guys. Those are the villains, rather than, well, thank God, at least then we can see what it is. We can look at it. We're not just closing our eyes to it. We can actually see when somebody's sick, they just stay home. right? But if you got the vaccine, then you didn't stay home because you didn't see the symptoms. And so we never thought about that. And so that was always the question mark for me. It was like, if it doesn't stop transmission, then where is this push for everybody to get it coming from? Like, where is this vilification coming from? Where is this guilt for people who didn't get it coming from? Because it's not like the people who have the vaccine are transmitting it any less. Like, that's the thing. It just baffled my mind. I'm just like, hold up. There's something wrong here. Like, there's something missing, but we can't have that conversation. And that's why. It's because as soon as you start questioning certain things, it falls apart. Right. And there was a lot of money behind this. Admittedly, there was a lot of money behind this. There still is. Now there's all kinds of new vaccines and new types of COVID treatments that are coming out. And it's just going to open the door to more stuff.
But doesn't that make sense, though, for a situation where they don't actually give a fuck how the disease impacts people whatsoever, and they just want to make a bunch of money, and they actually make additional money off of people being sick with the illusion that they're getting better and this is helping? Wouldn't it make sense that it would play out exactly as it played out? That you get this vaccine that doesn't actually cure anything, doesn't actually help you feel, doesn't actually help you overcome even the sickness itself, and those who are pushing that are admitting that now. It just hides it. It just keeps it suppressed so you don't feel it as much, but you're still going around and are able to spread it so that they can then make money off of people who do get it, and they can do, it's more like a silent disease, a silent pandemic. If everyone were to get vaccinated, it would still be there. There would still be those who wouldn't, the vaccine wouldn't work well enough for them to avoid getting overly sick, dying, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of money to be made off of sick people. So there's no incentive for there to not be sick people. There's just an incentive for people to do this thing, get this thing that actually allows for more sick people to come around and then and get made money off of. But now it's kept behind closed doors, so everyone thinks they're doing the right thing, and they're actually policing each other into getting it, despite there being no evidence of it being any degree of a cure. And it was like, oh well, it helps, cure you. It helps, and it's like stops transmission, and then it's like there's not even a good reason. There's like, just get it. Just what are you? What? It can't hurt. Really? Can it not? Do you have that much faith in them? It? Whatever? I feel funny saying them, but do you have that much faith in the system that they actually want everyone to be healthy? When you take a look, it's like, of course they don't want people to be healthy. There's so much money made off of sick people. There is
Well,
a
it's not just money, right? And this is what we were talking about in our review of 1984, right? It's power. Power comes from imposing suffering on people, imposing fear. And in that state of fear and suffering, they look for a solution. And if you're the one providing that solution, now they are willingly giving their power up to you. Right. And so there's this ongoing, I guess, reinforcement of our belief in those that will save us, right? And not in ourselves by any means. I mean, that was really the big argument, wasn't it? That you as a person don't have the right to say whether or not you'd like to have a vaccine. That we are all collectively responsible for one another. That it's not just your life. And that's kind of a weird argument. Like when you really break that down, that's a terrifying argument that goes in the face of everything the United States is actually built on.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense when you actually look at it. Like, you're responsible. When have we ever been responsible outside of children? And even then, a lot of people are like, yeah, don't really have to be. It's like it's actually pushed to not be in a massive way, like putting your kids in school, doing like pushing them away. Like there's a lack of responsibility in everything, and yet when there's a situation in which they can gain more power, they can use manipulative things and also make more money. There's going to be this push to all of a sudden be responsible for everyone. Like, no, you got to be. You actually have to be. It's actually in your hands what happens to everyone else. You're entirely responsible. Like, isn't that interesting that it's a total flip from everything else that we do and go through and everything else that's pushed? It's like, no, you're not even responsible for you. We'll help you out. We'll do this. Blah blah blah. Like we'll take care of these things. We'll take we'll cover all of the decisions that have to be made. Just give us some of your money, a percentage of your money, and we'll take care of the rest. We'll make sure the schools are pretty good. We'll make sure the food is adequate and easily accessible. But it's the comfort. It's here's more and more comfort. Just you don't have to take care of that. And then all of a sudden something becomes uncomfortable and it's like you're responsible for not even just yourself, which there is typically not even the narrative, but you're now responsible for everyone in all of reality because you might, come in contact with them.
Somebody was asking the question, or rather pointing out, the real question is, what is the agenda here? And I would say that the real danger is getting so lost in that question that you actually lose sight of what you can gain from this opportunity. Because what it's really drilling home is a lesson that we've been avoiding collectively for a long time, which is responsibility, individual responsibility for our lives. But that doesn't just mean responsibility for our neighborhoods and stuff. That's not what it means at all. It means responsibility for how we respond to things. So when we look at the world around us and we decide to pass on this, basically the blame for all of this to some shadowy organization of rich people who are sitting atop some mountain causing death and destruction to everybody else, like that's very disempowering. And we are choosing to respond that way. We are choosing to invest in that narrative rather than understanding that the power is the individual, that you are the world. And as you change, everything that you do changes, and every ripple that you make changes, and every impact that you have changes. And that's how the world changes. And this is exactly what they're trying to take away. This is exactly what is happening in 1984 is try to get rid of the individual, try to get rid of the individual will. So that's all that's left of the collective will is where it's told to go. Right. But our individual will is what makes the river so vast. It's what makes the river so, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Variable.
Yeah, basically, right? Like all of our collective wills is what creates the world, is what creates society. And so it's in focusing on our own will that we actually have an influence over what we're doing collectively, right? But if we're all collectively blaming somebody else, then we're passing up that power, passing up that opportunity to actively change reality by being responsible for everything we do from moment to moment to moment. Right. And then we just find ways to be more and more responsible together as a repercussion of that. But it starts with responsibility. And that responsibility has to be for how we respond here and now to the situation that we're in, not necessarily who put us here. The blame game does nothing.
Yeah, because it's kind of the same amount of disempowerment, right? And so that's why I think there's a lack of concern about how someone responds to anything, because both sides are going to blame something else. And if you're blaming something else, you're not taking that responsibility. And so then nothing really changes because then you're still very, very easy to manipulate. If you're taking responsibility for you and your experience and how you feel and how you act and how you respond and everything that you go through, you're not passing that off to anyone else. You're very, very difficult to manipulate. Far more difficult. When you're stretching that out, it's like there's a gap between yourself and what you think is responsible for you, and in that gap is the potential to manipulate you, to contort you, to get you to think in any other way because there's this thing that it's their fault. It's their thing. They're the reason that I'm feeling this way. They're the reason that I'm going through this. And it's uncomfortable to realize that it comes back to you, that it is your responsibility for your situation. Like you're responsible for you, and that's it on both ends. So you don't have a responsibility over anyone else either in the sense of how they act or an ability to have control over someone else. Because I think that the idea of having responsibility for someone else kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that you should be able to control them to some degree.
Well, you know what's
And so
best for them, right?
exactly. Oh, fuck. And that's what we saw so much during COVID, basically. It was like, I know what's best for you. You don't know what's best for you. You don't know. And so therefore, I know that it's better for you to not, go to the gym and exercise than to go to the gym. Or even some countries, it was, I know it's best for you to not go outside versus go outside. Like it was that extreme. Australia saw that. It's like people were locked in their homes. And it's that I know what you should do better than you know what you should do. And it's the extreme of thinking that there is something that should be done. There is a right
There you
way.
go. Yeah, absolutely. This is why I say, like, we get so caught up thinking about, like, who's doing it that we don't recognize it's a natural repercussion of the mentality that we're all very much committed to collectively, right? Like, you're always going to have more and more extremes of this exact thing because the mentality of control only knows more control, right? And as long as we're all still believing in control, as long as we're still all believing that what we think of ourselves is what we are, so we're always just running around that, then we're never actually able to work together. We're never actually able to surrender and be where we are, right? And so this just continues on, and people continue to want to hoard. This is why people have billions of dollars, because it makes no sense, like rationally. Like if you think about it, you're never going to spend that much money. Like you're never going to spend that ever, right? And it's so very interesting that we don't look at it that way because we're too busy trying to get that. That's why we don't question it. We don't question rich people because we want to be rich people.
And there's this, and it kind of ties with a lack of faith in yourself to some degree to be able to figure things out and do it without so much of a safety mechanism, a safety net. But if you as long as you have the safety net there, like it's hard to really truly be free in yourself. It's harder, and that's the, can a rich man get into heaven? Like rich man getting into heaven is like a camel walking through the eye of a needle. It's not to say that it couldn't happen, but it kind of couldn't happen in a way because it's a product, and it's not to say that there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it's a product of seeing yourself in a certain way, right? It kind of goes hand in hand with seeing yourself in a way, not seeing yourself in a specific way, just seeing yourself in a way, in any which way that you believe to be the truth, your idea of yourself believed to be the truth. Like there's a degree of certainty that you have to maintain in order to take certain actions. And so you'll never be free as long as you believe that, your perception of yourself is remotely true, is remotely correct. You'll always be hindered. You'll always, have at least one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah. So as always, the most revolutionary thing you can do is just relax and be yourself. Oddly enough, because the thing that keeps this system going in the way that it is this idea that you should be something else, that you can't just be you, right? That we can't just be us, that humanity, in fact, is on this road to evolution or progress or whatever the fuck it is, traveling the stars. I don't know. We still haven't mastered just, enjoying our day. But we're on a trajectory to get to the stars. I wanted to mention very quickly, thanks everyone for joining us for this kind of aftermath of watching 1984. It really is important to recognize that the world is not what we think it is. This is something that took me a long time to understand. It's so easy to look at the world and go, it's definitely that, because that makes sense to me. But that largely makes sense to you based on your perception. And a lot of it makes sense to you based on how disempowered you make yourself. So the world is not what you think it is, ever. You don't know. What you do know is you and your response to this moment right now. And if it's coming from a state of fear, then chances are that you're holding on to an idea of yourself that is exacerbating that fear. And if you want to change this system, question that. It's the best thing you can do. We are going to be continuing on in about 20 minutes here on our roundtable. You still have 4 minutes to register if you'd like to. Just go to patreon.com/dualistic unity, fill in the form. If I get the email in the next 4 minutes, then I will include you in the email with the link to join our roundtable at the top of the hour. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's just so important to look at these stories, these dystopian stories, and remember that they're looking at the extreme end of a very long spectrum that happens only under specific perfect conditions. Like the chances of 1984 happening are slim to none. The chances of like the elites getting total control are slim to none, because that's a way bigger endeavor than anybody, I think, is willing to really think about.
Yeah, and it's funny because even as I'm watching that, I'm seeing certain examples of it in society, and I'm like starting to think, "Fuck, this is possible. This could happen." But it is important to keep that in mind, that it is the extreme. It is, without, there's a huge process to things like that. And I think 1984, it's like a post apocalyptic time, right? Like there was a massive war or whatever, massive atomic bomb, or
Nuclear war.
yeah, things kind of reset, which, is also not a guarantee that that won't happen. But, there is no certainty in any which way. And your assumption of the trajectory that humanity is on is also incorrect. And it's always malleable. And it always comes down to you. Your response to the situation that you're in. Are you going to tense up, or are you going to relax? Are you going to think that there's a right way and a right path and a correct journey? Or are you going to let go of the idea that there is one and just pay attention to where you're at? Be willing to be uncertain where you're at. Be willing to be free right now. Like, can you be free from the idea, the certainty that you hold on to about yourself and how you fit and how reality is and how things are going? Or can you let go of that certainty right now? There's no other spot to do it. There's no other experience to have. Can you let go of the certainty that you have, that you are what you think you are? That everyone perceives you in the same way that you perceive yourself? That reality is happening in the exact way that you think it is happening? That your idea of the right way to live is the right way to live? Can you let go of those? Can you let go of those right now? The certainty you hold on to, because that's the shift. The uncertainty versus the certainty, the false certainty, the control, that the desire for control that comes with it, and all of the weight that you hold on to is maintained by the certainty that you hold on to inside of your mind. But none of that exists. And I want to talk about this more on the roundtable because I know we're wrapping up. But I've kind of talked about my journey in a very specific way, and my perspective of myself when I was younger is just as incorrect as my perspective of myself right now. The journey that I think, being perceived, I've said it a million times. Oh, I was quiet in high school, always concerned about what people thought. That's still just my singular perspective of myself. Someone else could have seen me in an entirely different way, could have interacted with me, 10, 20 times when I was being more talkative, and they could have seen me as a talkative person. And like, that's fucking me up. Like, it
Yeah,
really.
and it's relative, because of course there were people who were more quiet than you, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like it's always relative. Like it's the whole thing. We think of it as like, well, I was a fairly quiet person compared to what? Like that's the whole thing. But it's just us making a narrative. And again, you don't even know that that was the case. You could have also described that as a thoughtful person. You could talk. I was very introspective kind of person. Like there's a number of ways you could describe it, but it really just comes down to how you want to perceive it, which is never the truth. We're going to wrap up here. This has been a lot of fun. If anybody's interested in joining this conversation, do join us, twitch.tv/dualistic unity. We're going to be there in 15 minutes, and we'll continue with the roundtable. I'm excited.
Me too. Bye, everyone.